that's true. Naked Palpatine.
Oh, you pick that one. Fresh out of the clone tank, nude Palpatine is my
Well, that's the first thing I think of when you say Dark Empire Palpatine.
Hello everybody, and welcome to the tale of two friends and how they gave me something glorious to continuously talk about. Today I have for you Knight of Knives by Ian C. Esslemont, which this is part of the novels of the Malazan Empire. I don't care how it's properly meant to say. Malazan rolls off the tongue way better. Frick you. I don't care if I'm wrong. I'm going to keep saying Malazan. But currently, this is 2024, we are nearing the end. We are nearing the end of October, 2 months away to 2025, but this video will not be out until 2025. As of this time, Steven Eriksen's been working on a Ancient Past prequel trilogy, along with a trilogy sequel that takes place after the events of the Malazan Book of the Fallen. And his friend, Ian C. Esslemont, is, or has been, might be finished by this point, I don't know, a prequel series, not necessarily a trilogy, because I think he has 4 books out right now, on Emperor Kelvend and Dancer's rise to the throne, and other stuff. But there's that, and that's what they're currently working on. But what they both worked on, kind of more during Eriksen's second half of his novels, was that Ian C. Esslemont would write stories like kind of like in between, little side stories, but also important, but not like essential to the Book of the Fallen, but like stories that took place around the same time of the Book of the Fallen. And in case you think this is fan fiction or anything, I know some people like to argue that, because they do the same thing with like Dune. There's a little bit more of a case to be made, but also like, for example, my channel, what I've been talking about for years, has been the Star Wars Expanded Universe, which ran from like 1977 to 2014, okay? And so that was canon. No matter what anybody tells you, that was canon to the Star Wars Expanded Universe. That is what happened, or to the Star Wars canon. That's what happened. Any book that you read, that's what happened. And then Disney bought the rights, and all that stuff became non-canon, right? So all that stuff doesn't matter anymore, and I accept that. In terms of continuity, in terms of the Disney hierarchy, all the books that I talk about and love, they don't count. That sucks, but that's the case. But that's okay, because I'm going to ignore their stuff. I'm going to stick to the Star Wars Expanded Universe, because that's what I love, that's what I like. But it's not canon. And Disney owns the rights, so they get to make that decision. So in the same sense with like Dune, right? A lot of people dislike the Brian Herbert and Kevin J. Anderson sequels and prequels and all that stuff that they worked on. But Brian Herbert has more authority than you do, so therefore if he writes a story, it counts. But there's a little bit more leeway there to be like, yeah, but it's not on the same tier as Frank Herbert, which you can make that argument. The difference here is that the entire Malazan universe and setting and characters and themes and this and that all came to be because of Eriksen, yes, but also because of Ian C. Esslemont, because they both played D&D together and made their own world and settings when they were younger, and then Eriksen decided to write a story about it. In fact, there's a beautiful introduction here by Eriksen about how this is just a tale of two friends, and how when he started writing the Book of the Fallen, he wrote it for one person and one person only, his best friend Ian. The rest of you just came along for the ride. But I've only been ever writing these, or at least when I started, for him. So, you know, this is both their babies. They both created it. Of course, I won't lie to you. I think Steven Eriksen may be a better writer in terms of prose, in terms of structure, in terms of a lot of things. But by no means do I think that Ian C. Esslemont is like necessarily lesser. He's just different. In fact, I still think I've read like beyond 50 books in the Star Wars Expanded Universe. There's a lot of books. And I'd still say that at least this book alone, Knight of Knives, is better than a good portion of Star Wars Expanded Universe works. So this is still high praise. Anyway, all that long tangent to say that this is just as worth reading and just as valid as the Malazan Book of the Fallen. But this is Knight of Knives. Now, I looked it up online because I don't know much about this universe, but luckily there's people online that, have already gone through this stuff and can help. Most people recommend reading this before the Bone Hunters because I think a few characters from this book pop up in a small role in the Bone Hunters, which is the 6th book. Midnight Tides is a huge prequel that takes place before Caliban rose to the throne and before any of the books that we've been focusing on. So that's an ancient past. That doesn't, maybe not ancient past, but so it doesn't really matter for this. Knight of Knives is the night before, or is the night where Lysine takes the throne and becomes the Empress of the Malazan Empire. And that's that. It's a big prequel. Now, going into this, I thought I was going to be focusing on Emperor Caliban primarily and Dancer, but that's not the case. We're not focusing on them. We are focusing on 2 characters, brand new characters, that, and at first I was really jarred by that and I was really bothered by that. But at the same time, I kind of love that because this book kind of demystifies. I mean, when you start up Guardians of the Moon, they talk up this huge thing of the Emperor being usurped, and it feels very much like Star Wars, like melodramatic and big and epic in scale. But when you actually read it on the page by E.N.C. Esslemont, it's not like that. But then also it kind of fixed some things that have been lingering in my mind because I've always been slightly confused in the time frame here. Because when you start Guardians of the Moon, it seems to be that this is all happening fairly quickly after the ascension to the throne, and yet everything's still running pretty smoothly. It's like, wouldn't there be more chaos? But as you go through this book, you start to realize that the Emperor and Dancer have kind of been in the background a lot. Like, a lot of people don't even see them ruling because they don't really care about that. They're doing other stuff without getting spoilers. So there's a lot of... Lysine's kind of already been running things for a while because Emperor Caliban and Dancer always go off and do these mysterious things on their own. So no one really knows what's up with them. So, I mean, if there's a transition of power in this book, it makes a little bit more sense why things would just continue to run smoothly because Lysine's already been kind of doing that. Now it's just like official. So I like that explanation of that. But as for the new characters, Temper and I wrote her name down. I have it. Kiska. I rather enjoy them. Kiska isn't the smartest person in the shed, but she, is young, so it kind of makes sense. She's kind of like this book's Crocus. And then you have Temper, the old seasoned war veteran who just wants to relax and not deal with this BS, but here he is. And I mean, it's nothing we haven't seen before, and it's nothing particularly phenomenal, but there's room for these characters to grow, I would say. There's also just a little bit of the world building here that's kind of more clear and fresh, because I'm 5 books into the Book of the Fallen, and I still don't really understand the magic system. I'm just accepting whatever comes my way, because I don't know. But there's this line in the book where it talks about, it's anybody can learn magic. Some people, though, just have the touch, or the talent, they call it, which I think is, some people are just born more adept at magic. But anybody can learn it. But then here's another thing. Why doesn't everybody use magic? Well, Star Wars, you got Jedi, and the Jedi train other Jedi so that they all can do stuff. But if you have this power, and you're super powerful, and you're super strong, and you're super epic, and you're super great, and some random comes to you and is like, can I learn from you? What if this guy's psycho? What if this guy's evil? Why would I want to teach him that? So they don't. They're very selective about who they train. So anybody can learn it, but not everybody is gonna learn it. Because, there's a bit of a process there where somebody has to trust that you're not gonna... They don't want the Sith, the rule of 2, one with the power, the other to crave it, and eventually usurp the master and become the master. They don't want that, so they want to really trust the people that they're giving these things to. So that's why there's less of that in the setting. But I think, because I listened to interviews with Steven Erikson after I finish each book of the Book of the Fallen, and he always talks about how these books are feminist, and how they're equal, and how that the magic is the great equalizer in this setting. But I never really, I mean, it's not that it's not there. I mean, there's plenty of women in this series that do awesome things. Same time, I never really fully got it until this book, where it's like, yeah, because, if you get the magic stuff in the setting, that's a massive boon. That's a massive thing that not everybody has. It's a big power inject. But then even still, you have like Lysine, like even before she becomes the Empress, she is, the third most important figure in this entire political structure, even in this book. So she has that high power. Um, and I don't know, I think this book just helped clear up a lot of things that were a little bit uh, confusing in my mind. Just presented it in a much more easy fashion to understand, which I appreciated. It's also a very, very fast pace. I finished this book in like 2 days. And the only reason I didn't finish it yesterday is because I was at work. So, but because I started it like that morning, read a little bit on my break, and finished it today. So, but yeah, it's ultimately just the night that Lysine takes the throne. And if you haven't got up to book 4 in the Book of the Fallen, I'm not going to say anything to you. But yeah, I can't say anything to you because you learned some stuff in Deadhouse Gates about the Emperor and Kelvin that I don't want to ruin. So yeah, also, there's another thing. Non-spoiler wise, I suggest, a lot of people said to read this after book 5, but before book 6. But here's the thing: the series is moving so far beyond the plot of Guardians of the Moon that you really will not care about the story if you read it super far in. Here's the thing: pretty much everything you need to know that might be spoiled will be told to you by book 4. So I think by the time you finish book 4, you should start this book, finish it, and then move on with the rest of it. And you can either choose to intersperse that with the Crimson Guard and other books or not. But this is a prequel book, so it's not going to really affect your reading of the Book of the Fallen or anything. So I suggest you read this before starting Midnight Tides, which in of itself is a prequel book, and then move on from there. I think that's a pretty solid way of going about that. I'm getting to some spoilers. If you don't want that, it's time for you to go. But I will say last time, non-spoiler wise, is this near the Book of the Fallen? I don't personally think so. I think it's still written extremely well, but I think Erickson's just kind of on a different level, which is okay. Not everybody's going to be, and again, that's not a diss to Esslemont at all. I think this book is great. I've been hearing some mixed things about it, but I think it's really, really fun. I think it's a really solid read. By no means like the greatest book I've ever read or anything, but it's still really solid. It's a really good read, and I really think that everyone who's a fan of the Book of the Fallen needs to give these books a chance because it's a different flavor, it's a different feel, but it's still, in the end, still feels Malazan to me. Um, you know, even with characters like Teshrin, who's like kind of like a stereotypical like jerk, they give more nuance, and he gives more nuance to that character here, which I really appreciated. And at first I was upset that Emperor Calvend and Dancer were not the main characters. I mean, no one's ever the main characters. It switches POVs all the time in the Malazan series, but I expected it to them to be the forefront. But by actually keeping them in the background, it keeps their kind of like mysterious and awesome status that they have so far, because it's not from their perspective. I imagine his other prequel series is a bit more in their perspective. I'd imagine so. But this keeps them, in a sense, if you're reading this and you're trying to, not spoil it, like pretty much everyone, there's like no disagreement that the prequel books that focus on them should be read after you finish the Book of the Fallen. But if you wanted to intersperse this is a good one where it keeps them mysterious, doesn't totally ruin everything for you. And yeah, like I said, definitely don't read this anywhere before. Earliest you can read this is book 4. Latest you should read this is after Midnight Tides, because book 6 onward is going to go so far beyond, you will not give a damn about the story if you read it after all those books, because you already know everything. Personally, that's how I feel. It kind of ruins about that. But that's pretty much it for non-spoilers. If you don't want spoilers, get out of here. Alright, so we meet Temper. We meet Kiska. We also hear about this Jedel, or Jedel, an Edgewalker. Edgewalker's pretty cool. He's like a Talana Mas, sort of, I think, who's a slave to the Shadow. Um, we get mentions of the Crimson Guard. We meet this character named Oleg, who then dies but gives Kiska some information. But also, what's interesting about the Crimson Guard is that they're the military company sworn to defeat the Empire. And yet I've yet to hear anything about them outside of Book 1, Guardians of the Moon, in Malazan yet. But it is really interesting because we get a little bit more insight into this empire and how Caliban and Dancer are kind of neglectful. Like, they rose to power. They became, emperor and second in command to the emperor. And they kind of just go F off on their own adventures and do things. I kind of got the impression with this that Caliban and Dancer are Stephen and Ian. Because somehow they have a massive influence on the setting, and yet they're not really characters. Like, we don't really focus on them. It's almost as if it's like being a player character in a video game or a board game or D&D game, and you throw yourself into the world, you manipulate stuff that's going on in the world, and then you dip for a session. But imagine that the world continues to live on whether you're there or not. That's kind of the vibe I got from that. I could be completely talking out my butthole. I have no proof of this whatsoever. I'm just spitballing here. But it is interesting. They have bigger goals in mind. Like, the becoming emperor was only a secondary step to their main goal of acquiring more, which I think is really interesting. And it also recontextualizes a lot, which I think makes this story better because, when you start Guardians of the Moon, it's like, oh, typical sort of fantasy sword thing of, Lysine usurped the throne, she's now in charge, and that's very much the vibe it wants you to have. But this recontextualizes it because Lysine fell right into their plan. They really don't care whether or not she becomes empress or not. Their goals are higher than that, and I think that's kind of great. Also, this book does a really good job just with horror. There's a lot of disturbing and awful moments in the Malazan books I've read so far. But none of them try to be outright horror, and I think there's some very good moments with, like, the Shadow Hounds that are quite horror-esque, which was quite perfect because I'm reading this in October, so I think that worked out great. We also meet a character named Artan. Now, this isn't a huge spoiler. I'm not going to get into who Artan is. I mean, again, if you've read up to book 4, you probably would guess what this is by now, which is fine because there's another anagram of that name in Memories of Ice. So it's not the same, it's a different name, but it has the same starting point where you can kind of go, oh, okay. But I got it immediately, which is fine. We also learned a little bit more about Decime, which was an interesting thing that we've heard about that person. We haven't gotten too much in the Book of the Fallen about that person. We also know that the Claws Pale Imitation of the Talons by Shirley, or Sorley, who becomes Lysine. I mean, we kind of already knew that, but it was just how it's stated was cool. Also, something I completely missed, and this really isn't important, it just shows how diverse this setting is with women and different creeds and races. And I didn't realize that Emperor Caliban was black. They just kind of make that clear here, and I was like, oh, cool. Like, I didn't know. I had no idea what to Stephen Erickson might have even said so, and I probably completely missed it, but I was like, oh, that's awesome. So there's that. I don't know what Dancer is. I still don't remember. Until it's shown otherwise, I'm gonna assume that Dancer is me because I like Dancer a lot. So there's also this whole thing at the end, or nearing the end, with Johanna, this Jaghut, and Temper, and some interesting things going on between her and Edgewalker, which I assume would be picked up in another book down the line, because it's really interesting, and I assume they can't just leave that there. So it'll either be picked up in an Ian C. Esslemont book, or it'll be picked up in one of the Malazan Book of the Fallen books, but I hope those characters come back, because they're really interesting to me. Also, like I alluded to earlier, Teshrin. There's just a lot of humanizing of Teshrin, which I really wasn't expecting in this book, but it was nice to see. because he is kind of portrayed as stereotypically evil, even though no one's evil in the Book of the Fallen, like not completely. Like even the Cripple God, I imagine there'll be more fleshing out of him later on. But yeah, they just kind of, you know, and you could take it in multiple ways with how you want to interpret his character. But there's just a bit of kindness he shows, which it could also be, oh, this person could be useful later. But I also could see it as, you know, just genuinely trying to be kind this one time. I don't know. But it was interesting nonetheless to see. As like Kiska's doing her thing, Temper's doing his thing, they're trying to survive the night as these crazy things are going on in the middle of the night. But again, not the greatest thing. I thought the characters were fine. They weren't. I think also part of the problem is that while this story's really quick pace and you get through it really quick, it's also only like 200 something, almost 300 pages. So I feel like there's not enough time to actually flesh out these characters, which is actually a pretty small cast, which is a bit sad. But overall, like I said, I really enjoy Night of Knives, and I'm excited to read the other Esslemont works, which I will be interspersing with the Book of the Fallen, just so I can stay in this world a little bit longer. So we'll see how that all goes and how I feel about the other Esslemont works. But if this is his worst, which I hear very often that this is the worst of Esslemont's works, then it can only be up from here. So, because I really enjoyed it. Anyway, I kind of the same way that people said Guardians of the Moon is the weakest of the Book of the Fallen, and I'm like, I loved it. So if that's the worst one somehow, then, which by the way, it's not. So far, House of Chains is a really mixed bag for me. But you can go watch my review on that if you want to hear what I have to say about it. Or my thoughts, I guess. I don't really do reviews because they're too long. But yeah, anyway, thank you all so much for watching. Appreciate it. I'm almost halfway done with the Book of the Fallen, and I've just grown to love this universe and this setting, and I'm really appreciative of Steven Erikson and Ian C. Esslemont for everything they've done, for everything they've created, and I'm so glad to Marcel, my friend, the revanchist on YouTube, who mentioned this series, and he's been helpful to me too whenever I had questions. I'm kind of getting it now. I'm at this point where I'm like, I'm not too confused. But whenever I do have a question, I ask him, and he helps me in a non-spoilerly way, which I appreciate. So big props to him and mad shout-outs. He does, not lately, life gets busy, but he has put up a bunch of videos which are like audio dramas of short stories and such, so, of Star Wars. So if that interests you, it's just checking him out. But yeah, I really, really enjoyed it. And I'm really excited to start Midnight Tides by Steven Erikson. So until then, guys, I'll see you. And Hood's Breath, man. Another setting change coming up and a massive time shift. We'll see what that's all about next time. Bye-bye.